"Put the gun down, sir. Step away from the drone." That's what the deputy shouted, standing at the edge of my porch while the smoke from my shotgun still hung in the air. The thing lay 20 feet out in the pine needles, its rotors bent, its camera cracked open like a blind eye. For a second, I just stared at it. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was stunned. You could taste it. The smell of gunpowder, the hush of the mountains, and that single word echoing in my head: trespass. I lowered the Remington slowly, barrel still warm, smoke curling against the cold morning light. The deputy's hand hovered near his sidearm, unsure if he was supposed to arrest me or apologize. "You want to tell me what happened here?" he asked. "Sure," I said. "That thing was spying on me." "You shot a drone?" "Correction," I told him. "I shot a felony." He didn't know what to say to that. Most people don't. I've always believed in the sanctity of silence. Not the hotel room kind where air conditioners hum behind the curtains, but the real kind. The kind that presses against your ribs and seeps into your bones. The kind you find when there are no engines, no neighbors, no damn HOA committees counting the inches of your grass. That's why I bought 6 acres out here, tucked against the shadow of the Sangre de Cristo Range in southern Colorado. No restrictions, no streetlights, no one telling me what color to paint my porch. Just sky, stone, and solitude. My name's Harris Brady, 43. Used to be a U.S. Marshal. These days, I teach forensic science at a small criminal justice college a few counties over. Mostly bored kids who think crime scenes are like in the movies. They're not, and neither is silence. Out here, I'm not a cop, not a teacher, just a man who wanted to be left the hell alone. That was the deal. Peace in exchange for distance. And for 2 years, it worked. Until that damn drone showed up. The first time I thought it was nothing, just some weekend hiker testing a new toy. A quiet hum over the ridge, a flicker of movement between the pines. But it came back the next day, closer. It floated over the tree line, paused, and faced me head on, like it was studying me. I waved it off. It zipped away. Fine. Third morning, 5:47 a.m. I remember because I was brushing my teeth. Looked up and there it was again, right outside my bathroom window, hovering, its camera angled down through the glass. 10 feet from where I stood. I froze. For a second I thought maybe I was still dreaming. Then the red light on its lens blinked. Recording. "All right," I muttered. "Game on." By the end of that week, it had a schedule. 5:30 a.m., flyover from the southwest. Return pass near dusk. Same path, same height, same arrogance. Always just outside my fence line, close enough to watch, not close enough to claim. I started logging its visits, time, direction, duration. I set up 3 trail cameras, named the drone Black Hornet, because that's what it felt like, small, precise, and relentless. A buzzing that didn't just break the quiet, it infected it. There's a kind of insult that only a man who values peace will understand. When something dares to intrude on the silence you built for yourself, it's not just noise, it's war. I didn't start it, but I knew how to finish it. That morning, the sky was clean. No wind, no birds, not even the creek making a sound. Then came the hum, low, mechanical, a mosquito with intent. I stepped out onto the porch, coffee in one hand, shotgun in the other. The drone emerged from the tree line, matte black, unmarked, steady as a hawk. It stopped 15 feet in front of me, lens tilting as if it recognized my face. "You picked the wrong porch," I told it. I raised the Remington, lined the bead, and squeezed. The blast cracked the morning open like thunder. Plastic smoke and silence followed. A perfect trinity. For the first time in weeks, the world was still again. I thought that was the end of it, but I should have known better. In this country, peace always costs more than you think. And when you pull the trigger on someone else's surveillance, you'd better be damn sure who's watching you back. The morning after I shot it down, the silence felt different. Not peaceful, hollow, like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do next. I walked the property line at sunrise, coffee steaming in one hand, the 12 gauge resting on the other. No tracks, no debris, except for the twisted metal I'd bagged the night before. Still, I could feel something out there, past the timberline. Attention. You know that feeling when you're being watched, even though there's nothing to see? That sixth sense isn't paranoia. It's pattern recognition. Mine had been sharpened by 20 years of chasing men who didn't want to be found. So, I started building patterns of my own. I pulled the SD cards from my trail cameras. 3 angles, all time-stamped. Every frame showed the same thing. That drone circling low, dipping once near the greenhouse, again near the cedar gazebo, then retreating southwest. Clean, precise. Not a kid's toy. This was professional equipment. I zoomed in on a frame from the East Ridge camera. Right before it banked away, the lens tilted down. Infrared flare, clear as day. It was scanning. Not filming for fun, not sightseeing, mapping. Maybe my heat signature, maybe the land contour, maybe both. That was when the old instinct kicked in. The part of me I thought I'd retired with my badge. I set up a new routine. 5 a.m. Wake up, coffee, check cameras. 5:30, patrol the creek line, where the drone usually approached. Evenings, I'd sit on the porch with binoculars, pretending to read a paperback, but keeping the rifle close enough to touch. By the end of the week, it was back. Same model, or maybe its twin. It floated just above the tree line, keeping its distance, pretending innocence. But I could tell by its posture, yes, machines have posture, that it was hunting for something. The way it hovered, paused, adjusted, reminded me of the way I used to clear corners in safe houses. Patient, tactical. Whoever was flying that thing had training. This wasn't a curious hiker with a drone app on his phone. This was a man, or a team, who'd studied my land, my habits, maybe even me. One night, around 10 p.m., I stepped outside for air. The stars were out. No wind, no sound except the creek and the occasional bark of a coyote. Then, faintly, the hum returned, higher up this time, almost invisible against the black sky. It had night vision mode engaged. A soft red LED blinked, a heartbeat in the dark. I turned off the porch light and watched it through my scope. It wasn't random. It moved in slow, deliberate arcs, always along the southern edge of my property. Same spot, same line. Whatever they were after, it wasn't me personally. It was that strip of land. That realization didn't comfort me. It worried me more. I began keeping a logbook, time of flight, altitude estimate, direction of entry, exit vector, duration. You could have mistaken it for a field report from my Marshall days. Each page, neat and dated. I wasn't collecting stories, I was collecting evidence. And somewhere in the back of my head, I heard my old supervisor's voice. If you can map the pattern, you can predict the motive. I didn't know the motive yet, but I could feel it closing in. By the 7th day, I had over 30 entries. Everyone pointed the same way. Southwest quadrant, near the property line that bordered a development I'd never paid attention to before. Ridgetop trails. Somewhere beyond those trees sat the edge of somebody else's jurisdiction, and they wanted to push it. That night, I decided to make myself visible. I dragged a floodlight to the ridge and left it burning till dawn, angled toward the south. A quiet message. I see you. For the first time in days, the drone didn't show. I remember smiling into my coffee, thinking maybe the game was over. But peace doesn't knock. It sneaks up wearing a new disguise. 2 mornings later, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope. No return address, printed label, expensive paper that smelled faintly of toner and arrogance. Across the top, it read, Ridgetop Trails HOA, Compliance Committee Notice. I knew trouble doesn't always come kicking down your door. Sometimes it just shows up wearing a return address that isn't there. The envelope was thin, white, too professional for junk mail, typed label, no handwriting, no stamp smudge. Someone had delivered it by hand, or wanted it to look that way. I stood at the mailbox for a moment, holding it up to the light. Inside, a single sheet of paper, heavy stock, embossed header, a faint chemical scent, the kind of stationery people use when they want to sound important. Across the top, in proud block letters, Ridgetop Trails HOA, Compliance Committee. I actually laughed, out loud. The sound startled a magpie off the fence post. There wasn't an HOA within a mile of here. My property was carved out of the original parcel before the development even existed. Still, someone had gone through the trouble of pretending otherwise. The letter itself read like it was written by a bored lawyer who'd never met a pine tree. Your property does not conform to the visual and environmental standards of the community corridor. It went on about aesthetic expectations, non-compliant structures, and something called natural view alignment. It ended with the kind of threat you could frame. Failure to take corrective action may result in administrative review and potential fines. I took a sip of coffee, read it again, slower this time. Then I laughed harder. Not angry, amused. The way you laugh when a telemarketer calls you "sir" while trying to steal your credit card number. But old habits die hard. I was a marshal for 20 years. I've learned that absurdity often hides intent, and intent leaves a trail. So I walked back inside, grabbed my phone, and called the county assessor's office. The clerk on the other end sounded half asleep until I gave her the parcel number. Then I heard keys tapping, papers shifting. "Sir, your property isn't under any HOA," she said. "You're sure?" "Positive. You're outside the ridgetop overlay by about 8/10 of a mile. So if they sent me a notice, they have no standing whatsoever. That's harassment at best." I thanked her, hit record on my second phone halfway through her explanation, old habit again, and saved the file. Proof wasn't just power, it was protection. When you've spent a career testifying under oath, you learn the difference between evidence and noise. And I was starting to hear a lot of noise. I pinned the letter to my corkboard, right above the line where I'd written Drone Incident Num 1. It looked out of place among the photographs, timestamps, and maps I'd been compiling. Paper pretending to be authority, ink trying to pass for law. I poured another cup of coffee, took a seat by the window, and stared out toward the south ridge. The trees looked the same, still, tall, harmless, but now there was a story hiding in them, and it had an office somewhere with a fax machine. You can laugh at bureaucracy all you want, but I've seen men go to prison over the wrong form filled out in the right tone of voice. Power doesn't need to be legal, it just needs to sound official long enough to scare you. And that was the trick, wasn't it? Fear by letterhead. Paper bullets. By evening, I'd decided to file it properly. Scanned copy, time-stamped call log, audio recording from the county clerk. Everything went into case file, Black Hornet. Because if they thought they could scare me into compliance, they'd picked the wrong neighbor. The next 2 days passed quietly, too quietly. No drone, no letters, no strange cars on the road. Just the mountain wind and the sound of my own thoughts. Then, on the third morning, I heard an engine. Not the hum of rotors this time, but tires crunching gravel. A white pickup rolled up my drive, dust curling behind it. Man in a neon safety vest stepped out, holding a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, sir," he said cheerfully. "Name's Paul. Summit Geo Survey. Just here for a boundary recheck, routine stuff for the Ridgetop HOA." He tapped the badge clipped to his vest like it was supposed to mean something, and that's when I knew. The letter wasn't a mistake. It was the opening move. He looked the part. Khaki pants, sun visor, clipboard tucked under one arm. The kind of man who probably apologized to traffic cones. But I've met enough polite liars to recognize one at 10 paces. His truck idled behind him, a white Summit Geo Survey pickup with a decal half peeled off the door. He raised a hand and smiled, the way people do when they want something but don't want you to know it yet. "Morning, sir," he called. "Name's Paul. I'm just here to recheck the boundary for Ridgetop trails." Routine survey, nothing to worry about. That line, "nothing to worry about," always means the opposite. It's the same thing fugitives used to tell me before they ran. I nodded, kept my voice casual. "Routine for who, exactly?" He glanced at his clipboard. "For the HOA, sir. Some confusion about parcel lines." "That's funny," I said. "I called the county last week. They didn't seem confused." He blinked, just once, then smiled again, tighter this time. "Won't take but a few minutes." I let him set up anyway. Sometimes the best way to catch a man lying is to give him rope and let him tie his own knot. He unfolded a tripod, leveled it, and started sweeping a handheld scanner along my southern fence line, the same area where the drone had been circling for weeks. Coincidence? I don't believe in those. From the porch, I watched his hands more than his eyes. He wasn't measuring angles. He was documenting something. The device wasn't standard issue, too small, too sleek, and no laser line. More like a mobile mapper, infrared imaging or LiDAR, maybe both. He paused by the cedar gazebo, aimed the scanner downward, not across. That told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't checking boundaries. He was looking for something. I walked over slow, the way you do around snakes. "That unit give you readings in feet or meters?" I asked. He chuckled nervously. "Oh, both, actually. Pretty versatile." "That so? Looks military grade. You mind if I get a look at the data feed? He shifted, blocking the screen with his arm. Sorry, proprietary? Right, proprietary my ass. When he packed up 15 minutes later, he thanked me for my cooperation and handed me a card. It was generic, no website, just Paul R. and a phone number written in fading ink. He climbed into the truck and rolled away, waving like we were old friends. I stood there until the dust settled, then walked down to the fence line where he had stopped longest. Boot prints, fresh, and in the dirt, small triangular divots where the scanner tripod had been set. One of them lined up exactly with the spot where the drone had hovered 3 days earlier. Not a coincidence, a pattern. That night, I pulled the memory cards from my cameras. On the footage from the East Ridge, I caught him clearly, kneeling beside the gazebo, scanner aimed not at the boundary marker but straight down at the foundation. Then, a faint reflection, metal glint, probably a lens. He wasn't surveying my land. He was photographing it. I've been in law enforcement long enough to know how paper trails start. First, a letter claiming jurisdiction, then a routine inspection, then a violation notice based on data you never consented to give. Before you know it, you're paying fines to a committee you didn't vote for. Not this time. So, I decided to set my own trap. Inside my workshop, I still had my old GIS software, government issue from my Marshall days. I pulled up my property overlay and made a copy. Then I added a fake discrepancy, a narrow strip of land along the southern boundary marked as unverified zone. Looked official enough for a bureaucrat to drool over. On the corner of the page, invisible to the naked eye, I embedded a watermark that only appeared under infrared light. A series of microdots forming the words, County Appeal Boundary Error, Do Not Distribute. I printed it, sealed it in a folder labeled Property Dispute 24, and left it out on my workbench, just visible from the yard. Anyone curious, or any drone hovering near the window, would see it. All I had to do now was wait. 4 days later, it came. A new envelope, same sterile font, same thick paper. This one was heavier, 2 sheets this time. Inside, a formal statement citing recent boundary survey findings, claiming my gazebo extends 6 feet into communal green zone property. There was no communal green zone, not on any map, except mine. They'd copied the fake overlay exactly, down to the watermark I'd hidden in the corner. That's when I stopped laughing, because now, I had proof. Whoever Paul worked for wasn't just snooping, they were conspiring, and I was done playing defense. 4 days. That's how long it took for my trap to work. 4 days of pretending I didn't care, pretending to go about my usual routine, coffee, trail trimming, porch reading, while keeping one eye on the southern ridge. And then the envelope came. Same ivory paper, same cold bureaucratic tone, different content. It cited updated geospatial survey data that allegedly showed my cedar gazebo encroaching 6 feet into the communal green zone. Communal green zone. They even underlined it. There was just one problem. No such thing existed. Not in any deed, plat, or zoning ordinance in the entire county, except for the one I'd invented. I sat at the table staring at the letter, smiling like a man who just realized the fox had stepped in the snare. They'd taken the bait, every inch of it, including the invisible watermark I'd embedded. The watermark read, County Appeal Boundary Error, Do Not Distribute. And now it was printed, verbatim, on official HOA stationery. That was no clerical mistake. That was evidence of collusion and falsification. And in my world, that's the difference between suspicion and conviction. I spent the evening cataloging everything. The letter, the envelope, the metadata from my trail cameras. I lined them up neatly across my desk, like pieces of a puzzle I already knew the ending to. Pattern was emerging. Drone first, surveyor second, fake boundary third. Next would be leverage, either a fine, a lien, or some kind of compliance agreement. I'd seen it before, different uniforms, same motive, control through intimidation and profit through fear. But they picked the wrong man for that game. Just to confirm my theory, I did what any good investigator would do. I followed the money. Summit Geo Survey, the company on Paul's badge, didn't exist in the state registry. Closest match was a dissolved LLC from 10 years ago, but the contact email domain, summitgeo.net, was still active. It traced back to an office suite rented by Ridgetop Trails HOA. So the independent contractor who came to measure my land was, in fact, working directly under Karen Billis and her board. They weren't verifying property lines. They were manufacturing violations. I leaned back in my chair and laughed, quietly this time, not from humor, but from recognition. This was the same arrogance I'd seen in federal courtrooms, people so sure of their paperwork that they forgot to cover their tracks. I printed new maps, this time genuine ones from the county's digital archive, just to make sure there were no loopholes. Clean as a whistle. No green zone, no shared corridor, no community aesthetic buffer. Everything about my parcel was private, clear, and untouchable. Still, I wasn't done. I wanted them to step 1 inch further, to commit to the lie, because once they did, I could bury them with evidence. I backed up every file onto 3 drives, labeled, dated, sealed. 2 went into my gun safe, 1 into a deposit box in town. That's not paranoia, that's insurance. The next morning, I walked the boundary line again. The forest was still, colder somehow. You can tell when you've crossed from peace into strategy. It feels like the air's listening. At the cedar gazebo, I noticed small flecks of plastic buried in the soil. Pieces of rotor blades, probably from one of their earlier drones. I knelt down, brushed the dirt off a shard. Sunlight caught the serial number etched on the edge. I took a photo. It would come in handy later. That night, I sat on the porch with the radio off. Nothing but the sound of the wind crawling through the pines. For the first time in weeks, no hum, no flicker, no trespass. Just stillness. Almost enough to make me believe it was over. But that's the funny thing about predators. They always return to the site of a missed kill. And somewhere between the rustle of branches and the sigh of the wind, I thought I heard it again. That faint mechanical heartbeat. Out there in the dark, waiting for another chance. I stood up, eyes scanning the tree line. Nothing, just the stars. But I knew better. They weren't finished watching me, and I wasn't finished recording them. Twilight has a sound of its own. It isn't quiet, not really. It hums. The trees sigh, the wind settles, the crickets start their rehearsal. It's the moment when the world exhales, and men like me finally stop looking over their shoulders. That evening, I was on the porch with a book in one hand, coffee in the other, pretending to read while the sun bled slow behind the ridge. For the first time in days, I felt almost human again. Then the air shifted. A small change, barely there, but enough. You learn to sense those things when you've hunted for a living. The silence tightens, the temperature dips, the birds stop. And that's when I heard it. Not loud, not even clear, just a faint, mechanical murmur, low and steady, coming from the southwest ridge. At first I thought maybe it was a generator from one of the trail cabins miles off. But then the sound moved, side to side, closer. I didn't look up right away. Instead, I placed my mug down, thumbed the safety off the Remington leaning beside the chair, and waited. The hum grew sharper, closer still, until I could feel it vibrating in the air. Then it appeared, Black Hornet. It came out of the trees like it had never left. Sleek, dark, deliberate. Lower this time, slower. It wasn't scouting anymore. It was taunting. It hovered just past the porch railing, maybe 12 feet away, its lens angled dead at my face. A single red light blinked. On, off, on again. Like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. "You just couldn't stay away, could you?" I muttered. For a second, I almost admired the nerve of whoever was flying it. I could picture them somewhere behind a monitor, sipping a beer, grinning as they zoomed in on me. The crazy ex-cop who shot their toy once and would probably do it again. Maybe they thought I wouldn't. Maybe they thought I'd learned my lesson. They were wrong. I rose slow, steady. The drone adjusted its height, tracking my movement. It rotated slightly, like it was thinking. That's the part that chilled me. Machines aren't supposed to think. I took one step forward, then another, until I could see my reflection in its lens. Just a blur of shadow, rifle, and resolve. "You wanted a closer look," I said softly. "Here it is." I didn't warn it, didn't shout. There are some trespasses you don't negotiate. The Remington roared. The blast ripped through the quiet like a thunderclap off the canyon walls. For a moment, the drone wobbled midair, like it couldn't believe what just happened. Then the rotors coughed, sparked, and it spun violently, spiraling down through the dusk, slamming into the underbrush with a metallic crunch. The echo rolled across the valley. Then, silence. Real silence. The kind that hums in your bones. I stood there a long time, the barrel smoking in the dying light. Listening to the stillness reclaim the ridge. You'd think a man like me would feel victory, maybe relief, but what I felt was empty. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Predators don't stop when they lose one tool. They adapt. Still, I had to see it. I walked down through the pines, crunching needles under my boots, following the faint trail of smoke. There it was, half buried, shattered rotors, casing cracked open like a beetle's shell. Inside, a glint of circuitry and something else. Heat-shielded drive. Not a toy, not even close. I crouched, brushed the dirt off, and whispered to no one, "Got you." I bagged the wreckage, tagged it, and carried it back to the workshop. The night had already swallowed the last of the sunset. In the dark glass of my window, I caught my own reflection, gun in one hand, drone carcass in the other. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I finally had something they couldn't take back. Proof. It didn't take long for the cavalry to arrive. Next morning, 9:12 a.m., a white SUV rolled up my drive, lights flashing but no siren. 2 deputies stepped out, uniforms crisp, faces polite in that careful way lawmen use when they're not sure if they're walking into a crime scene or a coffee break. The taller one, mid-40s, sunburned around the eyes, approached first. "Morning, sir. You Harris Brady?" "Depends who's asking," I said, leaning on the porch rail. "Deputy Sandoval, Fremont County Sheriff's Office. We got a report of property destruction." I looked at him, then down the hill where the shattered drone pieces still sat bagged on my workbench. "That's so?" "According to Ms. Karen Billis, chair of the Ridgetop Trails Homeowners Association, you discharged a firearm at and destroyed private aerial equipment conducting a boundary survey." There it was, the lie. Delivered with perfect diction, like it had already been rehearsed. Karen Billis. Of course, I hadn't seen her in years, but I remembered the type. The kind of woman who could turn a parking ticket into a crusade for community order. I nodded slowly. "You boys want coffee before we start?" Sandoval blinked, then exchanged a look with his partner. Sure." Inside, I poured 3 mugs, black. I set them on the table next to a small flash drive. "Everything you need's on there," I said. "Drone footage from my trail cameras, 3 angles, timestamps, GPS overlay. You'll see that drone entering private airspace at least a dozen times in the last month." Sandoval raised an eyebrow. "You've been documenting?" "I was a U.S. Marshal. I document everything." He took the drive, tucked it into an evidence bag. "Appreciate the cooperation, Mr. Brady. We'll attach this to the report." He hesitated before speaking again. "You've got quite the setup here. Cameras, motion sensors. Most folks don't go to this much trouble. Most folks don't get stalked by a flying peeping Tom," I said. That earned the faintest smirk from him. Professional courtesy. He'd seen enough to know when a man wasn't lying. They left 20 minutes later, tires crunching gravel as the SUV disappeared down the trail road. For a brief second, I thought maybe this would be handled quietly, by procedure. Then my phone chimed. Email. From Ridgetop Trails, compliance@outlook.com. The subject line read, "Notice of damages, community asset destruction." I opened it. 4 paragraphs of stiff grammar and legal posturing, signed by Karen Billis, chairwoman, Ridgetop Trails HOA. They were demanding $400 equipment compensation, citing criminal mischief and willful aggression against community property. Community property. That phrase again. I read it twice, then laughed, hard, bitter. They weren't backing off. They were doubling down. I replied once, short and sweet. To whom it may concern. The device in question was operating illegally within private airspace without consent or authorization. Evidence has been submitted to local law enforcement and the FAA. Further contact without legal counsel will be considered harassment. H. Brady. I hit send, then poured myself another coffee. They wanted a war of paperwork? Fine. I'd been to worse wars. By late afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the bag containing the drone wreckage and laid the pieces across my workbench. The casing had split neatly, revealing the core board and camera assembly. Inside, I found a small, heat-shielded module, square, heavy, expensive. A solid-state drive with serial markings scratched off. Next to it, a compact GPS board labeled Maverick Pro M Tactical Logging Unit. Civilian drones don't carry modules like that. This was custom built, military or law enforcement grade. I ran my finger along the metal edge, feeling the faint ridges of tamper seals. Someone had invested serious money in watching me, and if Karen Billis was behind it, then she had friends with more resources than a typical HOA should ever have. I spent the rest of the evening cataloging the debris, photographing each piece under my work light. It felt like processing a crime scene, because that's what it was. Except this time, I wasn't the investigator. I was the victim, and the suspect, all in one. That realization burned hotter than the coffee cooling beside me. I uploaded everything to an encrypted drive and labeled the folder Drone Evidence, Phase 2. Then I wrote one last note in my logbook. 11/22/1847. Drone recovered. Evidence suggests tactical-grade equipment. Possible collusion between HOA and contractor. Escalation imminent. I set the pen down, looked out the window, and watched the sky turn black. For a moment, I thought I saw a red blink far off over the ridge. Probably nothing. But after what I'd learned, I didn't trust probably anymore. They could keep their lawsuits. I had proof. And now I had motive. The funny thing about wreckage, it always tells the truth. Metal doesn't lie. Circuits don't forget. And in my line of work, that's all you ever really need. By the next morning, I had the workshop cleared, coffee brewed, gloves on. I laid the drone out on a rubber mat under a single hanging bulb. Looked almost surgical. Maybe that's what it was, a kind of autopsy. The body was mangled, but not beyond recognition. 4 rotors, shattered shell, camera housing fractured down the middle. Inside the frame, a small compartment sealed with micro screws. Whoever built it knew how to hide a secret. I went slow, steady hands, careful not to fry anything that still held data. When the casing came free, I saw it. A solid-state drive about the size of a matchbox, heat-shielded and nested beside a GPS module with its ID plate scratched off. Not a toy. This was a professional-grade recon rig, with enough onboard memory to record for months. I hooked the SSD to my forensic dock, same one I used back in the Marshals Service. The LED blinked green once, then held steady. Live connection. I half expected encryption. What I got was worse. File structure looked simple at first. Folders labeled flight data, telemetry, video cache. But the timestamps didn't lie. 61 flights over 90 days. Every single one centered over my property. Not once did the drone record any area outside my 6 acres. Not one. It wasn't mapping terrain. It was mapping me. I opened the first video file. Grainy, infrared footage, my cabin glowing white against the cold blue of the trees. I fast-forwarded. There I was, tending the fire pit. Next clip, me trimming the path by the creek. Then one that made my stomach drop. The outdoor shower, steam curling into the morning light. And me, completely unaware. I stopped the playback. My jaw locked so hard I heard my teeth grind. There's a difference between surveillance and voyeurism. This wasn't about land. This was personal. I made myself keep watching, methodical. Every file, every timestamp. One at 2:04 a.m., the drone hovering near my bedroom window. Another at 9:17 p.m., camera zoomed in on my porch table, focused on the flash drive I'd left there for the deputies. Whoever ran this thing wasn't just curious. They were collecting intelligence. They wanted to know what I knew. I copied all data to 2 encrypted thumb drives and 1 cold storage SSD. Then I printed the flight log summaries, 1-page per mission, complete with coordinates and elevation. 61 pages. Each one proof that my life had become someone else's surveillance project. When I was done, I sat there in the dim light, the drone carcass staring back at me like a guilty witness. "You were never watching the land," I muttered. "You were watching the man." By noon, I was back in my element. Paperwork and chain of custody. I documented every file, tagged each piece of hardware, then drafted 2 formal complaints. The first went to the Federal Aviation Administration: unauthorized drone operation without line-of-sight control, illegal night flights, and failure to display FAA identification. The second went to the County District Attorney: criminal harassment, invasion of privacy, and unlawful data collection across private property lines. I knew what most people would say: "You're making too much of it." Maybe. But if you don't make too much of things like this, they start making too much of you. By mid-afternoon, paranoia crept in, the professional kind, trained instinct, not fear. I went outside and started sweeping my truck for trackers. Didn't take long to find it, tucked up under the rear bumper, magnet-mounted, the size of a Zippo lighter, dust-covered, but too new to blend in. I popped it off and turned it over. Small blinking diode, still active. Another GPS device, not standard retail. This one had a SIM chip for remote updates. Someone had been monitoring my movements too. I carried it inside, photographed it, logged it, then placed it in a padded case. When Deputy Sandoval came by later that evening to follow up, I slid the box across the table. He frowned. "You found this on your vehicle? Passenger side rear, wired smart. Would have slipped past anyone not looking for it." He turned it over, expression tightening. "We'll run it. See what we can find." 3 days later, he called. His voice was quieter than usual. "Trackers registered through a shell company," he said. "Payment trace goes to a business account under Ridgetop Trails HOA." I didn't answer right away, just let the silence hang. Sometimes silence says more than anger ever could. That night, I poured a drink, sat by the window, and looked out at the ridge, stars sharp against the black sky. Somewhere out there, someone had been watching me like a lab rat. Maybe they thought I'd never find out. I took a slow sip and whispered, "You should have done your homework." Because if they thought shooting down their drone was the end, they were about to learn what it looked like when the evidence started shooting back. The moment the tracker tied back to the HOA, I stopped being a homeowner and became a case file. They'd crossed the line from nuisance to criminal enterprise, and I wasn't about to let them hide behind a logo. So I did what I've always done when the trail gets deep. I called for backup. Her name was Julia Rich, ex-JAG attorney, friend from my Marshall years. Sharp mind, cold coffee, and a record of making bureaucrats bleed ink. I sent her everything: the drone logs, video stills, GPS tracker report, and the HOA letters. Within an hour, she called back. "Jesus, Harris, this isn't overreach. This is a program." "How bad?" "Bad enough that if half of this checks out, we're looking at wire fraud, digital trespass, and federal airspace violations." "And the other half?" "The other half's going to court." That night, Julia drafted the first salvo, a counterclaim against Ridgetop Trails HOA and its chair, Karen Billis. Charges included harassment, unauthorized surveillance, data tampering, and the use of tracking devices without consent. We added one more line that made her grin when she typed it. Plaintiff asserts invasion of privacy through aerial instrumentation operating under false authority. Legal poetry, but lawsuits move slow. The truth doesn't. So I took a second route, one I hadn't used since my badge days. Media. There was only one reporter I trusted with this kind of powder, Tabitha Knox. She'd helped me blow open a county corruption ring 15 years ago. She knew how to make facts hurt. I drove 2 hours to Santa Lucia, met her at a diner off Highway 24. Same place we'd met during that old case. Same corner booth. Different kind of war. She listened in silence as I laid it all out. The drone, the fake maps, the letter, the tracker, the lawsuit. When I finished, she leaned back, folded her hands, and said, "You realize what you're sitting on, right?" "Evidence." "No. A bomb." 3 days later, it went off. Front page, the Santa Lucia Times. Drone wars. HOA accused of illegal surveillance on non-member property. My photos were there. The broken drone, the red-circled flight maps, even a still of me on the porch, mid-standoff. She'd blurred my face, but the story didn't need names. It needed facts. And Tabitha had plenty. She'd tracked down other homeowners near Ridgetop Trails. Turns out, I wasn't the only one. At least 5 others had received compliance letters, despite living outside HOA borders. 2 reported drone flyovers. One had a camera hidden in a community birdhouse. The article went national within 24 hours. HOA watchdog groups picked it up, then talk radio, then TV. People started writing, emails from across Colorado, New Mexico, even Utah, stories of harassment, fake fines, intimidation. One man wrote, "They said my mailbox violated design standards. I live on a farm." Public anger spread faster than wildfire. Meanwhile, Julia was in motion. She subpoenaed Summit Geo Survey's corporate records. What she found made my blood run cold. The company didn't exist. It was a shell, funded by a private analytics firm called CivicScan, headquartered out of Phoenix. CivicScan specialized in residential compliance analytics, a fancy term for data-driven surveillance sold to HOAs under the guise of community safety. Their system integrated drone imaging, GPS logging, and behavioral tracking of residents, all automated, all monetized. And Ridgetop Trails was one of their pilot programs. They weren't just after my land. They were testing a model, how much control you could exert over private citizens without ever stepping foot on their property. Julia's counterclaim turned into a class action. Tabitha's article became Exhibit A. Within a week, the county district attorney announced an official investigation into HOA overreach and unlawful digital surveillance. They raided the Ridgetop Trails office. What they found was a horror show of paperwork. 6 dossiers, each labeled with a street address, mine included. Inside, high-resolution drone photos, license plate logs, heat maps, even social media screenshots. Some marked with handwritten notes, refused HOA offer, anti-compliance attitude, probable violation. One folder had a photo of me, coffee in hand on my porch, circled in red. Below it, subject inactive, 6:43 a.m. They weren't policing, they were profiling. Karen Billis didn't go quietly. She went on local radio, claimed it was all a misunderstanding, an overzealous contractor, bad communication, unfortunate optics. But the county records told another story. 6 forged plats, 2 falsified notices, and a paper trail of payments to CivicScan totaling $47,000. Tabitha's second article landed like a hammer. HOA data scandal, surveillance program linked to CivicScan analytics. By week's end, the sheriff's department issued a warrant. Karen was arrested on charges of forgery, conspiracy, and unlawful use of surveillance equipment. Her mugshot ran beside a photo of my cabin. 2 worlds, side by side, hers collapsing, mine finally quiet. I'd like to say I felt triumphant. Truth is, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like exposure, like someone had lifted a curtain and let the rot see daylight. HOAs across the state began deleting compliance drone pages from their internal portals. Lawmakers called for hearings. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was retreat. The kind predators make when the light's too bright. And I knew then, this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was every homeowner's who ever got bullied by a committee that thought it was above the law. The difference was, now I had proof, and proof doesn't go away. You can tell a lot about justice by the sound of the courtroom. In the movies, it's gavel cracks and shouting lawyers. In real life, it's coughs, paper rustle, and a judge trying not to lose patience. That morning, the old Cobra County courthouse smelled of floor wax and history. I'd been in dozens of rooms like it before, usually wearing a badge, not a sport coat. This time, I was the witness, the plaintiff, the man who shot a drone and accidentally uncovered a criminal syndicate wearing HOA letterhead. They called the case Billis et al. V. Brady, but to the folks in town, it had a better name, the Drone War Hearing. Half the county showed up just to see if the rumors were true. Karen Billis sat across from me at the plaintiff's table, beige blazer, pearls, and a face so tight it could hold a grudge without blinking. Her lawyer looked like a walking insurance brochure, slick hair, loud tie, voice that squeaked when he said, "Your Honor." Julia sat beside me, calm as ice. She didn't need to posture. The evidence spoke louder than any speech. The bailiff called for order, and Judge Patricia Lochner took the bench, a silver-haired woman with the expression of someone who had seen too much nonsense in her career to tolerate new varieties. "Let's make this quick," she said. "I've read the filings. Ms. Billis, you may proceed." Karen's lawyer stood, trying to project confidence. "Your Honor, my client simply acted in good faith to ensure community safety and uphold property standards. Mr. Brady's aggression—" Julia raised a hand. "Objection, mischaracterization of lawful self-defense and privacy enforcement." "Sustained," said the judge, not even looking up from her notes. The poor man deflated like a bad balloon. He shuffled papers, tried again. "The HOA only sought to clarify parcel boundaries." "By deploying drones with night vision," Julia interrupted. "Those were independent contractors. Funded directly by the HOA, per financial records from CivicScan Analytics. Julia slid a printed ledger across the table. The judge picked it up, adjusted her glasses, and hummed. Interesting. Continue, Counselor Rich. That was all Julia needed. She moved like a surgeon, precise, no wasted motion. She presented the drone wreckage photos, the GPS tracker report, the forensic data logs. Every timestamp lined up with HOA emails scheduling boundary observations. Then she hit them with the big one, the forged property map with the infrared watermark. Judge Lochner tilted her head. This says do not distribute. Care to explain that, Ms. Billis? Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. Her lawyer whispered something about clerical oversight. Clerical oversight doesn't usually involve tampering with county plats, the judge replied dryly. I almost smiled. Almost. When it was my turn on the stand, I kept it simple. I moved to that land for silence, I said, to teach, to work, and to be left alone. Instead, I got drones watching me shower and letters pretending to own my ground. Julia handed me a document. Mr. Brady, what is this? Flight log from the drone. 61 entries, all targeting my coordinates. And this? County record proving I was never under HOA jurisdiction. And who collected these? I did. Old habits. The judge looked up. Mr. Brady, you used to be a federal marshal, correct? Yes, ma'am. Retired, not reformed. That got a few quiet laughs from the gallery. Even the clerk cracked a grin. Karen finally took the stand. Her voice trembled at first, then grew defiant. I only wanted to preserve community harmony. Mr. Brady was hostile, uncooperative, dangerously independent. The judge leaned back. Dangerously independent. I'll remember that one. Julia waited a beat, then said, Ms. Billis, do you recognize this payment authorization? She held up a copy of a check to CivicScan. It's your signature. I don't recall. And this contract for Summit Geo Survey? That wasn't me. It was sent from your office email. Julia slid another exhibit forward, printed at the top, Ridgetop HOA Expansion Initiative. Attached was a note in Karen's handwriting. Target parcels, high-value lots, minimal resistance. The room went dead silent. Karen's lawyer tried to object, stammering about context and interpretation. The judge cut him off. Counselor, if you say out of context one more time, I'll hold the context in contempt. The gallery chuckled. Karen glared daggers, but the damage was done. Truth had a way of speaking louder than titles. By the end of the session, the judge ordered all HOA assets frozen pending full investigation. She glanced at me before adjourning. Mr. Brady, thank you for your thorough record keeping. It's refreshing to see someone still understands the value of evidence. I nodded. Evidence doesn't lie, Your Honor. People do. She gave a thin smile. That's why we're here. The gavel struck once, sharp, final, like a closing gunshot. As the crowd filed out, I stood by the window, watching sunlight spill across the courthouse steps. Karen was surrounded by reporters, her lawyer shielding her face. Flashbulbs popped. Somewhere beyond the commotion, I heard the faint hum of wind through the cottonwoods. It sounded like silence reclaiming its ground. Verdicts don't arrive with fireworks. They arrive in silence, ink on paper, a gavel's echo, a weight lifted that you didn't know you'd been carrying. 2 days after the hearing, I got the call. The judge was ready to deliver her decision. The courthouse was quieter this time. No cameras, no crowd. Just a few reporters outside, a handful of lawyers inside, and the smell of old wood and colder justice. Karen sat at the front again, same beige blazer, but the confidence was gone. Her lawyer looked like a man praying for a mistrial and a stiff drink. Julia was calm beside me, pen ready, eyes forward. Judge Lochner entered, robe neat, voice steady. No speeches, no theatrics, just judgment. In the matter of Billis et al. Versus Brady, this court finds the defendants, Ridgetop Trails Homeowners Association and Chairwoman Karen Billis, guilty of multiple counts of forgery, conspiracy, and unlawful surveillance in violation of state and federal statutes. Her words hit like slow thunder, every sentence deliberate, every pause a nail in the coffin of their arrogance. The court further recognizes the plaintiff, Mr. Harris Brady, as having acted within his legal rights to defend property privacy and personal safety under federal law. Damages awarded $320,000 for emotional, reputational, and property violations. She turned to Karen. Additionally, Ms. Billis is hereby sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, with 5 served in custody and the remainder under monitored probation. You are further prohibited from holding any position of authority within regulated communities for life. The room stayed still, except for Karen's lawyer, whispering a hopeless objection that died before it left his mouth. Then came the part that felt less like law and more like poetry. Julia stood and made one final request, that the HOA be required to issue a public apology, published in the Santa Lucia Times, mailed to every resident under their jurisdiction, and permanently displayed on their official website. Judge Lochner didn't hesitate. Granted, and make sure it includes the phrase, "We acknowledge the wrongful surveillance, overreach, and harassment committed by our leadership." Her gavel struck once. It sounded like closure, like punctuation at the end of a long, ugly sentence. Karen didn't look at me as they led her out in cuffs, but I saw her reflection in the glass door as she passed, jaw tight, eyes defiant, the type who would rather drown in pride than float on truth. Outside, the reporters swarmed. Questions flew, microphones thrust. I didn't stop for any of them. I'd said everything that mattered inside that room. As I walked down the courthouse steps, I caught a glimpse of Julia talking to Tabitha by the curb. They were both smiling, small, tired smiles, the kind people wear when justice actually does what it's supposed to. I nodded to them, then kept walking. Sometimes words just get in the way. The settlement came through a week later. The money didn't matter much. What mattered was what came after. The HOA dissolved under court order. Their assets liquidated to pay damages and fines. And per my request, $25,000 of that went to the Colorado Property Owners Freedom Fund, a nonprofit that helps families fight abusive HOA clauses. A full circle, from silence to voice. The first quiet evening back at the cabin felt unreal. No hum in the air, no letters in the box, just the wind sliding through the pines and the steady rhythm of my own breath. I stood out on the porch, looking toward the ridge where Black Hornet fell. The light was golden, fading. A hawk circled high, free and unbothered. I'd had a sign made, brushed steel, mounted where the drone had crashed. It read, "No HOA, no spying. Trespassers will be litigated. Tourists love it now. They stop by to take selfies, thinking it's a joke. I let them. Because once, I thought it was too. Some nights, I open the old evidence case. Inside lies the scorched housing of Black Hornet. One rotor still half attached. I keep it as a reminder, not of fear, but of resolve. When you've lived long enough, you learn the world doesn't hand you peace. You earn it, piece by piece, file by file. They called me paranoid. They called me hostile. They called me dangerously independent. Maybe I am, but I sleep just fine. This morning, the county sheriff stopped by for coffee. Deputy Sandoval smiled and said, "Place looks quiet again." "That's the idea," I told him. "No drones, only hawks." He laughed, shook my hand, and left. As his car rolled away, the sound faded into the trees. And then finally, there it was again. Silence. The kind that hums through the mountains and seeps into your bones. The kind that means no one's watching. The kind I moved here for. A month after the verdict, my land stopped feeling like a battlefield. No patrol cars, no envelopes, no low hum slicing the morning air. Just wind, creek water, and a sky that didn't look back. They say peace is just the space between fights. Maybe that's true, but for me it was more like the quiet after the gun smoke clears, when you finally realize the echo has stopped. The world, of course, didn't stay quiet. The story went everywhere. Tabitha's headline made national syndication. The man who shot down the HOA. They turned it into everything. Memes, podcasts, think pieces. Some called me a vigilante, some called me a patriot. Most just called me crazy and right at the same time. I didn't mind any of it, because for once, the noise wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at them. CivicScan folded within 3 weeks. Their investors pulled out after the DA seized their servers. The rest of the network, the little data compliance partnerships hidden inside HOA contracts, crumbled soon after. Turns out when you shine enough light, the roaches scatter on their own. Julia moved on to another case in Denver. Tabitha won an investigative journalism award and sent me a photo of it taped to her fridge with the caption, "You started this." I sent back a picture of my porch with the caption, "You finished it." Sometimes justice doesn't need a podium. It just needs witnesses who remember. Every so often, a student from the college drives up the ridge to interview me for a project. They're polite, nervous, unsure what to expect from the guy who shot a drone. I make them coffee, let them record. I tell them the same thing every time. Evidence wins when emotion burns out. Keep your records straight, your conscience cleaner, and never trust an institution that calls itself your neighbor. They laugh, but they always write it down. Last week, a reporter from a national outlet wanted to film a segment here. I declined. I've had enough cameras for one lifetime. Instead, I built something new behind the cabin. A small workshop, tin roof, simple table, 6 folding chairs. Once a month, I host a free workshop for private landowners. I teach them how to read a plat map, how to spot fake compliance letters, how to file an FAA report. We sit out there with coffee and notebooks, the mountains in the background, and I watch people realize that ownership doesn't end at a property line. It begins there. They started calling me Marshall Brady again. At first, I didn't like it. Now, I don't mind. It reminds me that law doesn't live in offices. It lives where people stand their ground. The other day, a stranger stopped at my gate. He said he was passing through and wanted a picture of the sign. I told him sure. He smiled, snapped his photo, then asked, "You ever think about writing a book?" I looked out over the ridge, where the sun was burning gold through the trees. "No," I said. "I think about the silence." He didn't understand, but that's all right. Most people don't until they've lost it. That night, as dusk melted into the valley, I poured myself a drink and sat on the porch. The wind moved soft through the pines, and the creek whispered somewhere down below. No hum, no rotors, just quiet. Earned, not given. On the table beside me sat the scorched casing of Black Hornet, one last fragment of the war I never asked for. I turned it over in my hand, felt the cool metal, and smiled. "You hear that?" I said softly. "That's mine again." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.